In October of 2001, a NASCAR driver hopped into his car for what should have been just another race weekend. Instead, it became one of the darkest moments in modern NASCAR history. Blaise Alexander was a young, talented driver and still climbing the ladder of stock car racing. He wasn't a superstar yet, but he was exactly the kind of driver that the sport was built on. And when his life was cut short, it became impossible for NASCAR to keep ignoring a growing problem. This is the story of Blaise Alexander and why his legacy quietly helped change NASCAR forever. Blaise Alexander was born in 1978 in Pennsylvania into a racing family that understood the grind of grassroots motorsports. Like many drivers before him, he didn't start in NASCAR. He started small. Alexander began racing go-karts and competing in the World Karting Association, where he showed early promise. In 1992, at just 14, he won the WKA East Regional Championship, a sign that his talent was real and not just enthusiasm. From there, he moved into micro sprint racing, a brutally competitive level of short track racing that demands precision and bravery. Over several seasons, Alexander racked up dozens of wins, reportedly totaling more than 40 victories across regional circuits in Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, and Florida. This wasn't just a hobby. This was a career taking shape. By the mid-1990s, Blaise Alexander was ready for the next step. In 1996, he entered the ARCA Series full-time, a proving ground for drivers hoping to reach NASCAR's national ranks. That rookie season, Alexander impressed immediately, earning ARCA Rookie of the Year honors. Over the next few years, his results continued to improve. He scored 3 ARCA victories, including Toledo in 1999, Pocono Raceway in 1999, and Michigan International Speedway in 2001, where he started on pole and dominated most of the race. These weren't just fluke wins. They came against experienced competition and on demanding tracks. By the early 2000s, Blaise Alexander had become a legitimate prospect. Alexander made his way into NASCAR's Busch Series on a part-time basis beginning in 1997. In 2000, he landed a seat with Team Sabco, one of the more respected organizations in the garage at the time. He was competing against deep veteran fields, and Alexander posted top 10 finishes and finished 25th in Busch Series points, which was respectable for a young driver who was still finding his footing. He wasn't a headline grabber at the time, but within the garage, he was viewed as someone who was still learning, still improving, and still moving forward. Then came Charlotte. On October 12, 2001, NASCAR arrived at Lowe's Motor Speedway. During the event, Blaise Alexander was involved in a violent crash. Late in the event, Alexander was running near the front of the field battling closely with Kerry Earnhardt, the son of 7-time NASCAR champion Dale Earnhardt. The two were racing aggressively, separated by only inches as the laps wound down. As they approached the start-finish line, the field began to compress due to slower lap traffic ahead. Kerry Earnhardt lifted to avoid a lapped car, and Alexander closed the gap almost instantly. In a split second, the two cars made contact.
Inside of Earnhardt, he may get by him here. Let's see. Oh, there's contact, and Alexander hard into the wall.
The contact sent Alexander's car sharply sideways across the racing surface, with little room to recover and almost no time to slow down. His car slid towards the outside retaining wall. At high speed, Alexander's car struck the wall nearly head-on, the most dangerous type of impact in stock car racing, where the energy cannot be dissipated gradually. Earnhardt's car was also caught up in the collision, flipping onto its roof before sliding to a stop. He was shaken but able to climb out under his own power. Alexander was not. To fans and even some officials watching live, the wreck appeared violent, but tragically not unusual at the time. NASCAR had seen many crashes like this before. Safety crews responded immediately, and Alexander was rushed to the hospital. Despite medical efforts, he later died from a basal skull fracture caused by the violent deacceleration and extreme movement of his head and neck during the impact. It was the same injury that had already claimed several drivers in just a few short years, including Tony Roper, Kenny Irwin, Dale Earnhardt, and Adam Petty. And now it had happened again, during a race for the lead involving two young drivers on one of NASCAR's biggest stages. By the time Alexander died, the racing community was no longer asking if there was a problem. They were asking why it hadn't been fixed sooner. Between 1999 and 2001, NASCAR had lost several drivers and now Blaise Alexander, all to the same injury. Different tracks, different cars, and different circumstances, but the same result. Inside the garage, whispers turned into conversations. These conversations turned into frustration. The common thread was clear: head and neck trauma during sudden deacceleration. The technology to reduce that risk had already existed. The Hans device was designed to restrain the head and limit the violent motion. This had been available for years, but it was not mandatory. Many drivers found it uncomfortable, and others worried that it would limit their movement in a crash and be more dangerous. Teams hesitated to adopt the equipment that wasn't required, and NASCAR, bound by tradition at the time and resistance to rapid change, allowed that hesitation to continue. Alexander's death forced the issue into the open once again. Because unlike some of the previous losses, Blaise wasn't a veteran nearing retirement. He was just 23 years old, healthy, talented, and still learning. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. After 2001, NASCAR reached a point where delay was no longer defensible. The deaths had become far too frequent, and the injury patterns were too similar. Behind the scenes, engineers, doctors, and safety advocates pushed harder than ever before. Data from crashes was studied more thoroughly, impact forces were analyzed, and head movement was measured in ways it never had been before. Within the next few seasons, NASCAR implemented sweeping changes. Head and neck restraints became mandatory, helmet standards were upgraded, seat mounting systems were redesigned, harness geometry was improved, and medical response protocols became faster and even more coordinated. While Dale Earnhardt's death is often cited as the movement that changed NASCAR forever, many insiders acknowledge that Blaise Alexander's death reinforced the urgency, especially within the Busch Series and among young drivers. His death proved that safety improvements weren't just about protecting legends, they were about protecting everyone. The sport entered a new era, one defined less by tradition and more by engineering, science, and survivability. In the days following Alexander's death, reactions across the racing world were quiet but heavy. There were no grand ceremonies or nationally televised memorials. Blaise Alexander wasn't yet a household name, but inside the garage, drivers and teams felt the weight of another loss. Veteran drivers spoke privately about their frustrations, not just grief over how long it had taken for meaningful safety changes to be implemented. Younger drivers who were climbing the same ladder that Alexander was were shaken up. He had been just one of them. Blaise Alexander never had the chance to become a star. He never reached the stage where his name sold tickets or attracted sponsors, and yet his impact on the sport may have been greater than many champions. Every driver who survives a violent crash today, from Daytona to Talladega to Charlotte, does so in part because lessons were learned too late for others. Alexander's legacy isn't defined by wins or championships. It's defined by what came after. Blaise Alexander should still be here. He should have had more races, more seasons, and more chances to grow into the driver that he was becoming. Instead, his name exists quietly in NASCAR history, tied to a moment when the sport finally had to confront how dangerous it had become. His death wasn't meaningless, but it was preventable, and that reality is what makes his story so difficult and so important. Modern NASCAR is safer than it has ever been before. Drivers now walk away from crashes that once would have been fatal. Medical teams are able to respond faster, and the equipment protects them better. These advances didn't come easily. They came through loss. Blaise Alexander may not be remembered the way that champions are remembered, but his impact lives on every single time a driver climbs away from a wreck. Some legacies are written in trophies, and others are written in lives saved. And those are the ones that deserve to be remembered. If you like NASCAR history like this, please subscribe to keep hearing more stories like this.